Hey friends, Ian May here with the Wired for More ADHD and Self-Mastery podcast. One of the biggest issues that I see high-performing, highly successful ADHD professionals going through is that when they run into big burnout cycles, they often struggle with being able to turn on in the moments that they used to. And for tasks and activities that used to come easy to them, that they used to have a lot more success in being able to show up for, that all of a sudden the motivation, the drive, even just the ability to start the task, it feels like they are going through quicksand. It feels like you're telling them to put their face on a frying pan. That is how little motivation they can pull into the new task or the new strategy. I see this a lot with the sales folks that I work with, sales reps who felt so much energy early on in their sales careers when they're closing littler deals, but they're doing them more frequently, and they had so much energy, and they just continued to get better and better and better and sell more, sell bigger deals. And inevitably what happens is that the upside stops feeling as big. Every time you close a deal, you ring the bell. The ringing of the bell stops being as motivating, stops being as exciting, stops feeling the same way that it used to. And so they all of a sudden find themselves having more financial success than they've ever had, having more output in the numbers and the metrics and the objective reasoning that they have to say, I'm a success. But they feel so much more tired, so much more frustrated, so much more anxious to even try to generate it and to cultivate the same level of output that they used to cultivate. So what's interesting about this experience and this burnout is that oftentimes where this comes from is that they actually don't know where their passion or motivation started from. They don't know how to turn it on. They actually don't know what drove them in the first place. They just had success and rewards, and all of that was just intrinsically built in. And now that it isn't showing up for them, they're not sure how to cultivate it, not sure how to create it. And it feels empty now, the same strategies and the same tools that they used to use. And for some of these people, they found themselves in a huge amount of dysregulation, distraction, and addiction, because they're chasing that feeling elsewhere. They're trying to go find it in other things, other activities. And this is usually where people come to me. My background initially, the first 50 coaching clients were all addiction focused. My own personal story started from a place of addiction, struggle with abusing alcohol in my late teens and early 20s, affecting how I was showing up at my work. I actually used alcohol to self-medicate when I was in college. I would drink while studying, and just enough so that I would mobilize some dopamine. Essentially, I had this whole theory around just a little bit of alcohol is just enough to feel like I wasn't stressed or anxious, but not so much that I felt like saying screw it and just getting drunk. And I, at the time, did not have a healthy perspective on mental health, ADHD, didn't recognize that I was even self-medicating. And so for a lot of people who are in this highly successful state, they also don't know that they're self-medicating with the things that they are doing outside of work hours. They play hard, they work hard, and that's celebrated. It's celebrated to go hard all quarter and then go disappear on a beach and get drunk and wasted, and then just completely demolish all of their motivation and drive even further. And that's if they're even doing it once a quarter. For me and a lot of people that I've worked with, it's every single work trip that they're going on. They're staying in the hotel bar much later. They're going to conferences all the time. They're staying up late with their conferences and with their clients. They're partying hard and living big. And it just feels like there's nothing that can bring them down. And there's some amount of mania that's attached to it. But when they all of a sudden start having those patterns and those behaviors, those dysregulated patterns and those addictions, as those start to chip away at the things that matter to you, how you're showing up for your family, how you're showing up as a husband, as a father, and then ultimately how you're showing up even in your work, the thing that was the most motivating for you initially, all that starts to deteriorate. Now all of a sudden you have these wake up moments where, hey, I've got to get it together. Hey, things are falling down around me and I don't know how to pick myself up. And when they're in that big state of burnout and they're not quite sure, how do I turn this on again? I can't force myself to do this. Some of the limiting beliefs that are there is I can't trust myself with success. I can't trust myself to steward. I'm going to use the word steward. And those of you who are followers understand where that word comes from. Don't know how to steward wealth, finances, money, status. They don't know how to steward those things well. And as a result, they feel they can't go back onto that high peak performance because the same things that used to drive them no longer drive them anymore. All of those operations are so challenging for people who are going through burnout, ADHD burnout in particular, because what used to drive them came from a place of fear, came from a place of anxiety, came from a pressure to perform rather than fuel that is more sustainable, fuel that comes from deep, meaningful purpose, deep connection to who you're serving, deep intentional alignment with something bigger than yourself, something that goes outside of your own perception of time, space. And in people who are in faith circles, they can be like, oh yeah, I do this in service of God and my faith. But then others who might say the same things and just do it out of a sense of, I just say these things so that I can feel connected with my religious tribe. So all of these are things that we just continue to chip away at of what was the old pattern, what was the old way, what was the old thing that was lighting you up before, and how has that been manipulated to where now you can't use it anymore. Maybe going back and looking at what was true there, what was useful in those patterns, what was beneficial and actually very much so values aligned. How do we start to tease that out and pull on that thread and sit with the discomfort of, yeah, I didn't show up the way that I was supposed to. Actually, this was coming from a very insecure place. For me, oftentimes that was in my sense of confidence and masculinity and a lot of these pursuits that were surrounding my perception of myself as a man. Doesn't mean that they were right. Doesn't mean that they were useful. Obviously, those things fell apart. They do not hold up to the bigger, greater thing that actually can pull abundance from. And so oftentimes when we start to lean into things like faith, spiritual practices, deeper meaning and connection, we can start to see, hey, what was actually this beautiful, abundant thing that I wasn't even able to see, that actually I pulled so much of my own security into? How do I go back up that same mountaintop again with a new perspective, with a new level of energy, with a new kind of energy that's not born out of anxiety and stress? For the high performer who's still in a state of high performance, usually they don't know how to come down off of that mountaintop. So they're like, no, I got to stay here. I got to redline all of my resources, redline myself. I don't care if I burn myself to the ground. I can always pick myself back up again. But they don't ever actually learn anything in that process. They don't actually create sustainable habits that allow them to sustain that level of. They only get rewarded for those peak performative moments. They only get rewarded for the intense output. And so oftentimes it's like, hey, if I come down off this mountaintop, who will I be? Who am I when I'm not on this mountaintop? Who am I when I'm not pushing myself this way? Who am I when I'm not being able to see these metrics for success consistently? All of these dysregulated patterns go beyond whether you're medicating, whether you're seeking counseling and therapy. So much of this is building up a resilience to our old patterns and just being able to take some agency and ownership of how I did or didn't show up in the past. Being able to look and see, hey, what were the beautiful things that were actually useful, that were me, who I associate and want to reinforce moving forward? And then on top of that, what were the dysregulated patterns that actually aren't me, I don't identify with, or I don't want to reinforce anymore? Maybe they were true before, but they don't serve me anymore. And this is where I think this process, this ego death that often has to happen, usually comes with a lot of pain. And so your ability to sit with the emotional discomfort is what the skill that most people with ADHD need to develop. Because the ADHD brain has more dopamine surrounding the emotional centers of the brain, we are very strongly emotional creatures. We may not think of it that way because we think of emotions as being very dysregulated, or we think somebody who's emotional, it's a very negative thing. Usually when we say somebody's emotional, we mean that they're not logical or they lack executive reasoning. But what's interesting is that if that person uses their emotions to pull them to do something really big and beautiful and powerful, we don't say that they're emotional because we celebrate the trophy. We celebrate the accolades. We celebrate the big things that they're doing, when in reality, it can be just as much of an emotional process that got them there. We just don't call it that. We don't call it an emotional escape when it's so filled full of success and accolades and trophies. We don't call it that. And so this whole process for us unearthing and digging into and sitting with old patterns, old behaviors, old things, we almost have to start with the emotional regulation first so that we can look at all of these patterns from this emotionally neutral place. And that is a skill. That is something that can be grown and developed. And the big issue that I see for a lot of people is they'll just have these emotional blockages and create an identity around that. they'll create an identity around not necessarily having those big feelings, not necessarily allowing themselves to have that thing, continuing to obsess about work and just work, and workaholism is rampant. For the people that I work with, they oftentimes have to look at, how do I celebrate the boring and the mundane and doing the quiet work? And this isn't the administrative work. This is the soul work. This is the deep, deep personal work that no one else can really do for you. And I think if you're being honest with yourself right now, you'll either be able to say, hey, I'm avoiding that work. Actually, I don't like to spend time with my thoughts. I don't like sitting with the discomfort of not having something to do. I feel anxious when I'm not building, when I'm not growing, when I'm not doing something with my hands. Idle hands is a devil's playground, whatever that analogy, or whatever that quote is. I probably totally butchered that. All of that is the thing that we can continue to lean into and continue to piecemeal through. The people who I continue to see doing amazing things are the ones who are willing to be both the scientist who collects data, who obsesses about data, who peers at behavior and thought patterns and identity statements and belief systems and the visceral experience that they go through. They look at all of it through a microscope, and they have this ability to be both the scientist who's the collector and observer and the one under scrutiny who's under the microscope itself. That whole process is something that is worth celebrating. And the people who usually lean into the work that I'm helping them do are the ones who are willing to invite somebody else into it, are willing to invite somebody into that deep place, that difficult place. The whole goal of ADHD coaching is increasing the likelihood that you follow through with the things that are important to you. Knowing what is important to you is half the battle. Is this really important to me? Or am I just doing this because of the praise that I used to get as a kid? Is this really important to me, or is this just something that I don't know how to say no to? Is this really important to me? Does this really light me up? Is this really something that I'm on fire for? Or am I just looking for something new and novel and don't know how to sit in the difficulty of when something starts to become more boring and mundane? As much as I help people and coach people through this, I find myself in these same patterns. The mirror gets pulled up all the time when I'm sitting across from a client. I have to do this work myself. Me recording this podcast even is me doing the work right now. In real time, you're seeing it happen. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love for you to share more of your story about dysregulation or the success that you've seen coming out of it. My email is open. Feel free to send me an email, ian@ianmay.co. Would love to hear from you. Would love to connect with you. Appreciate you for listening this far. Talk to you soon.